If I could go back to any given point in time, I would go back to the 7th of May of 1976. I'd slap myself across the face first for being so reckless, and taking advantage of that moment of pure stupefaction, I would instill the one truth that's been ingrained on me, carved upon my very soul after all these years. There are things in this world far worse than any monster, devil, or any other malicious machination man can contrive, and they walk among us. You've probably heard of them before. They change their name from time to time to avoid someone from noticing the pattern. Were it not for my personal hyperactive curiosity, I would have probably missed it too. Circus of Horrors, Circus of Nightmares, Circus of Lost Souls, Circus of Terrors. These are just some of the many masks they don to lure you. Their name, I assure you, is nothing more than a Trojan horse, for just below their vague name lies an insurmountable abyss of turpitude. The more I manage to learn about them and their methods, the more I ponder on referring to them as humans. It all started, at least for me, in the tiny and forgotten town of Mauiqua, Illinois. It's no surprise that word gets around pretty quickly here. Yet I had not heard from them before, not even from my neighbor blabbermouth and gossipmonger extraordinaire, Agnes Fletcher. She was a good lead from time to time, but her recurrent slanders almost costed me my job more than once. I used to be a journalist at Herald and Reviews. In a way, I am still a journalist. I am still a seeker of the truth. On a scorching hot spring day, as I walked out of my office, I was approached by a teetering clown of all things, and he handed me a pamphlet. He was remarkably dexterous at handing them out, even with his oversized cartoonish gloves. The clown's makeup should have melted away into a waterfall under this heat, but he wouldn't budge, as if he was too afraid to expose whoever lurked beneath it. "Come and watch," the clown said. He then tried to smile, which only resulted in an unsettling, distorted smirk that stretched out most of his face. His already beady eyes became microscopic marbles of the blackest coal. I do not consider myself as squeamish, but I did take a step back, not sure if it was out of primal instinct or simply subconscious angst. Without awaiting any response, the clown turned around in one swift hop and continued to march down the street, dragging along his tattered flamboyant robes, unaware of the duress he had inflicted on me. Or perhaps he had seen the knots of convoluted fright in my eyes, and realizing that his commission was fulfilled, decided to leave me with more questions than answers. Upon closer inspection, the pamphlet itself looked exceptionally old, blemished, and yellowed for such a novel attraction. The year was blotted down and rewritten by hand with a deep red ink. I raised the paper directly in front of the sunlight and gazed through it. Its original date read May 7 of 1956. It must have been from a presentation that happened 20 years ago. A speck of doubt gnawed at me, though. The rest of the words, although eroded and some of the letters by the decay of the print work, were not corrected. Grasping the mystery I had just stumbled into, I decided to snoop around. I was no amateur, and by that I mean that I knew how and where to get my information. But this was a completely different beast. No one, not even Agnes in her 75 years living in this town, recalled of such a thing as a Circus of Horrors. Since my interviews were basically a gargantuan dead end, I headed over to a local library. If any records of this spectacle existed, they would be there. It was a quite dull and time-consuming chore, but back in 1976, this was the only way. "Back at it again, Jack?" Robert Norton said as I entered. "Ever heard of the Circus of Horrors?" Robert rolled both of his eyes down for a brief moment, and after adjusting his hulking spectacles back up, he squinted. "I don't believe I have. Why?" I handed him the battered flyer. He clasped it carefully with each of his skeletal fingers, making sure he'd not chafed a single part of it. Handling crumbling and fragile archives was a vital part of his occupation after all. He scanned it from top to bottom, and then placed it gently over his desk. "Seems like they've been here before, all right. Probably someone else might know." "Nope. Everyone's blank, Robert. Just like you." Huh. Yeah. Robert jumped out of his chair and rushed to one of his back rooms. About a minute or two later, he wiggled himself past the door he had just disappeared through, juggling 2 large cardboard boxes all the way to one of the study desks. A stiff grunt slipped out of him as he flopped both boxes over the table. 1942 to 1975. Let's get to it then, he muttered, trying to cloak any joy in his voice. A smile blossomed on my face as I took a seat beside him. I knew Robert had a passion for mystery novels. He lived for this sort of conundrums and conspiracies. We scrutinized every newspaper, combed every page, and dissected every little tidbit of information on incoming folk shows. Besides a couple of fairs and carnivals here and there, we found no mention of any circus whatsoever. I had bumped into another dead end. Not a single mention of the only circus that has ever approached this town? I said as I slammed one of the folders shut. I agree. It doesn't make a lick of sense. So, what now? I guess the only way to find out is by going to the show. You can't be serious. Didn't you see the... Robert stuck his head out of the folder he was browsing. The clown. He's been bobbing around all over town. By the looks of it, he's hell-bent on getting as much people as he can into tonight's show. An uncomfortable silence settled within the long halls of bookshelves surrounding us. I felt that we both wanted to say that it was nothing, that it was probably a concoction built from my over-inquisitive nature and Robert's avid imagination. The doubt I had tried to brush off had grown tenfold, and now chomped at each and every nerve of my body, urging me to see how deep this rabbit hole went. I stood from my chair and raised both of my arms into a stretch. Robert was right. I knew it, but my bowels revolted in protest. A brisk shiver cantered down my spine. Someone stepping over your grave? Robert asks, bemused by my jolt of motion. Let's just hope it's not someone at that damn circus. Thanks for helping me with the archives. Robert started picking up each of the folders and rearranging them back into the cardboard boxes. Don't mention it. And Jack, please don't do anything stupid, okay? I was not afraid back then. I was just like you. I walked carelessly upon this earth, oblivious to what lies beyond our wildest nightmares, unbeknownst to the sickening abominations I have now witnessed. Ignorance is indeed the one and only true bliss. Oh, be careful, I said as I made for the front door. I walked out of the library and was immediately greeted by a spout of cold wind. A herd of rain clouds paraded across the night sky. It was a welcome shift in weather after the searing heat wave, but to my dismay, only a few droplets slammed themselves against my windshield on my way to the town's limits. A splattered cloth sign with the legend Circus of Horrors hanging by the side of the road informed me that I had finally arrived at my destination. A modest clutter of townsfolk had gathered around the main tarp. I counted about 40 to 50 heads, but they were more than enough to stir up an acerbity of yammers and babbles. I stepped out of my car and loaded a fresh film roll onto my Nikon. A gentle breeze, similar to the one outside the library, blew through the grass field. It felt different though. It now felt charged by an oppressive enmity and a rather unpleasant reek. It reminded me of sulfur, or rotten eggs perhaps. Realizing that there was nothing around me that could ever produce such a pungent odor, I simply disregarded the pestilence, concluding that there must have been some nearby droppings by the circus critters, and I approached the ticket tent. They say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Then again, you'd probably have to be blind to think of the woman attending the ticket post was anything but a hideous fiend. If the tent were to be any smaller, she would probably not fit inside it. The numerous flaps of skin on her arms rested on a small wooden counter. Her glassy pupils, massive overjaw, and bloated cheeks made her look like an anglerfish. "We're sold out," she said with a gruff bark. "What? No, miss. You see, sold out." She gripped a rusty handle at the top of her counter and pulled it. For a second I thought she was going to rip it right off, but instead another piece of tent cloth, unraveled and fell over the front of the tent. And just like that, she was gone. Being one entry ticket short, I milled around the big top for my own alternative admission. The wire fence was not exactly high, but it was well illuminated. I eventually found a point on the far east side devoid of any personnel scurrying along. I jumped over the fence in one swift bound. Going prone once I landed was the safest bet, since there was virtually nowhere to hide between the fence and the tarp. The fence's metallic rings rattled violently and pumped a bulk of fear into my system. I stood, but not fully, like a sneaking thief about to make some big heist, and sidled closer to the tarp. There was an uproar inside. Children bickering with jovial anxiety, women arguing, rebelling against their husbands who had drunk too much ale to stay afloat or congruent, stubborn elderly men squabbling about an age long gone. They all merged together in a chorus of disparity. A strident metallic click resonated throughout the tent. Fearing getting caught sticking my head out like a sore thumb, I slipped the lens of my camera through the awning cloth. As I looked through my scope, I realized that they had killed all of the lights. "Welcome!" a voice boomed in the darkness. A spotlight emerged from the top of the tarp and focused on the man in the center ring of the stage. His attire was utterly bizarre for a master of ceremonies. He wore the ivory skull of a deer, antlers and all, over his head, a sleeveless crimson tabard with an eldritch symbol completely alien to me, and a grotesque, downright bestial set of fur gloves and boots. "We've gathered here to bear witness of the horrors that lie in the night," he said as a tower of flames gushed out of the corners of the tent. The audience wooed and awed. The man then stretched his hand out of the light. A beautiful woman emerged out from the black. Her cold golden hair and emerald eyes stopped my heart at that very moment. She was flawlessly divine. "And now, with my lovely Martha, we will call upon our main attraction. Do you wish to be scared?" A loud "Yeah!" echoed along the clothed walls of the tarp. "I can't hear you. Do you want it or not?" the man exclaimed. A gurgle of shouts, even louder than before, thrashed throughout the tent with raving anticipation. "Yeah!" the crowd howled. Sporting an ominous grin, the man waved a sign with his right hand to someone out of the spotlight and held the hand of his attractive assistant with his left one. The spotlight's beam of light dissolved, leaving all of us blind again. A series of clangs, stomps, and clicks assaulted our ears. The sounds then halted abruptly, and the spotlight was casted once again in the main ring. There, in the center of the stage, stood a woman with about 7 or 8 months of pregnancy. All 4 of her limbs were chained to a monstrous steel contraption that enclosed her, immobilizing her almost completely. The woman jerked her body wildly, trying to break free of her bondage. Her eyes darted around at the audience. I zoomed in on her in order to get a better look of her acting, but I could only see in her eyes genuine fear, a fear too pure and true to be merely some counterfeit display of emotion summoned out on a whim. The master of ceremonies entered into the light and advanced toward the grotesque cage, brandishing a jeweled knife with a crimson edge. "I will show you my horror. I will show you my truth. I will show you my God." I could see Martha's faint silhouette at the edge of the light. A muffled shriek came out of the pregnant woman. She bent and rattled her arms and legs, making every little bit of distance she could manage between her and her captor. As the man raised his weapon and clipped down into the woman, the light was killed once again. A piercing scream erupted from the darkness, followed by sepulchral silence. I stood there, petrified, unable to think, see, or hear anything at all. I just wanted them to turn the damn lights back on, so that I could see that it was just an act, so that I could shrug off this impending mortal stress that coiled my very being. A red spotlight sparked in the dark and illuminated the center stage. The woman's belly was painfully sliced from side to side. A river of her eviscerated entrails hung from her torso. I first thought that the rest of her bowels and organs had slithered out of her and into the floor, but I was wrong. A hush of gut reverberated and bursted forth into an outgrowth of bowels, bones, and an assortment of organs. Several malformed tentacle-like offshoots sprung from the horrid mesh of innards. Each of these stomach-churning appendages belched out bloodshot eyes on its sides and had a maw with several rows of fangs at the end of them. Most of its amorphous body glided around the floor, while its tendrils blasted a blood-curdling cacophony of perpetual agony. Their maddening outcry pounded violently at my skull. The more I listened to these otherworldly sounds, the more a word kept popping, again and again, in my mind. Die. 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 A sudden burning sensation at my feet released me from my stupor. At just a couple of inches from where I stood, a carved circle in the grass shone with a fierce, unnatural glow. An array of abstract symbols, similar to the ones on the man's tower, laid beside it. Fumes of strange orange hue seethed out of them. Another outburst of inhuman cries overwhelmed my senses. I frantically looked through my camera, completely unprepared to what lied inside that tent. The monstrosity's arms latched onto each of the members of the audience. All of them appeared to be in some sort of seizure. Their eyes and mouth opened and closed erratically. Their hands twitched and contorted in impossible positions. No one, at least to my knowledge, looked conscious or aware of what was going on. The tentacles proceeded to vomit a thick gray syrup into their mouths, eyes, and nose, the vomit creating a disgusting mask of filth that poured down their necks. After discharging 2 or 3 loads of their nauseating regurgitation, the tendrils withered away into a flat husk of flesh. A giant set of jaws emerged from the formless amalgam of entrails. The creature wailed. "My lord, Thrusta Tak," the man exclaimed as he bowed his head. "This is my truth, Martha. This is my God," the man said. Martha cupped her hands over her mouth, looking around in an expression of hysteria. Her eyes moved back and forth between the audience and the unearthly abomination. As she lowered her hands, a devilish smile rose out of her lips. "It's beautiful," she said. A familiar bleep jerked me back into reality. I had somehow filled my film pack. I don't remember ever pressing the shutter button, but with a full roll and a mind on the verge of a breakdown, I decided I wasn't going to take any more chances. I figured the cops would be able to handle this. Once I showed them the picture, they would have to believe me. Either way, I knew that I was way in over my head at this point. I jumped over the fence and ran back to my car. The growls inside the tent slowly faded away. The awful stench, however, followed me all the way to my car. I stopped at the nearest phone booth and dialed 911. I explained in a barely intelligible flurry of half-sentences what had transpired inside that tarp. The operator dispatched a couple of patrol cars down to the town's outskirts. To this day, I honestly don't know what convinced her to believe my crazy story. They found no circus. I was not able to get anything out of the film either. I took it to my usual film shop, but every single picture was just a mess of overexposure. Whatever I encountered at that night could not be bound into a photograph. I drove back to the same spot I saw them at, but there were no signs of a settlement of any kind. No tarp, no circus, anywhere at all. After a second batch of interviews, I came back same as before, empty-handed and confused as hell. Every single flyer, sign, or mention of it vanished overnight. I am not insane, and I don't say this as a mere dramatic statement. After these events, I questioned my own sanity, took every available test, and even checked in for 3 years at a mental institution. The more I talked about it, the more it felt like it was just a dream. I'm an old man now, and when you get old, You start seeing things from a different perspective. You start believing what you want to believe. If I hadn't stumbled upon this website, I would have died thinking that this was just my own demented head playing a rough one on me. Who would have thought I'd find Martha Lurkins after all these years? At least I was able to get some closure before kicking the bucket. Doctors give me a week to live. Once you get cancer, I guess you have to get used to receiving bad news. There's only one real question I wish to ask to God if I ever meet him. Who in their right mind would ever create something like that?